Well, my goodness, you all are a fun group. My goodness. Hey, do you all remember, it seems like about 3 weeks ago, but I think it was yesterday when I gave that first talk. and I talked about that unwritten code, unwritten part of the job description of clergy, which is their job is to keep everybody comfortable. And then I said that, but if you are comfortable, you normally don't grow or change. Do you remember that? That was a long time ago, I know. A lot of water has gone under the bridge. But as I sat here this morning, I need to tell you all, I think there were a few uncomfortable people in the room at a few different moments. And that is such a good sign. If you haven't yet reached a point of discomfort, I hope you will, where there's still time. I will never forget the proverb, what is it? If eat coconuts while you still have teeth. Years ago, one of my mentors gave me this little proverb: a mind that expands to embrace a new idea can never shrink back to its former dimensions. And I think that's mostly true. But I think what happens to some minds is that when a new idea comes in, they refuse to receive it. They won't expand to embrace the new idea. They just shut it out before it can get in. And so to the degree that you let yourself be stretched by a new idea, rather than rejecting it, can I just ask you, rather than rejecting it, can I invite you to let it stretch you? And I want to say something else. Maybe I'm wrong about this. I hope in a way that I am, but I don't know. Some of you would know. But I doubt that a group of Episcopal leaders in Wyoming, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but have ever listened to a Native American priest talk to them for an hour, maybe about anything, but certainly not about Native American spirituality. I mean, I don't know if that's ever happened before. But, what happened this morning could really be historic. It really could be historic. I just feel very moved by this. I need to tell you, some of you know I work with an organization called the Living School and the Center for Action and Contemplation. Franciscan Father Richard Rohr started this, and they did a series of 7 annual conferences called Conspire, and we just had the last one online. Were any of you part of that online? Yeah, so quite a few of you. And the opening ceremony was led by a Dene woman who lives in New Mexico. She led an opening land acknowledgement ceremony. And I went up to Father Richard at the end, and I said, and at the end of the very first session where she had led, and I said, if the entire conference ended now, I think it would have been worthwhile, just because a lot of white people listen to someone whose voice they haven't listened to before. You understand what I'm saying? And to hear Melinda this morning and Roxanne, so important. And I want to thank them for, you understand, maybe you don't, but when you're a racial minority in a group so dominantly monochromatic, you may not understand how hard it is just to get by, and then to have the courage to share your treasures with people. It's remarkable. The amount of discomfort that other people go through, if you experience discomfort, you should just consider yourself so lucky, because so many people in majority cultures are never uncomfortable because they just always feel they're in charge of everything. And so I just had to say that before I talk about the church on the new frontier and especially Episcopal vision. I think our congregations and denominations have a very simple choice, and I hope it will be clear this morning or this afternoon. You can make 5,000 small changes, each of which will cost you about a pint of blood. You can argue about guitars versus organs, and colors of the carpet, and changing one word in a prayer. And although you can have 5,000 of those, and you won't last. It'll take 3 generations of people to be born and die to give up that much blood to go through those 5,000 changes. Or you can have one change. And that change is to reverse the polarity of the universe, as we discussed this morning. To stop seeing ourselves as only being bound to the past, and to see ourselves rooted in the past, but being beckoned by God into the frontier of time, which is this moment entering the future. To re-understand Jesus not as the one who's back there, and if we look over our shoulder, he's going to be sternly wagging his finger at us for leaving the first century. Or maybe the 15th or 16th, or maybe 1970 something. But rather to see Jesus ahead of us on the frontier, inviting us to participate, follow Jesus into the future. I just have to tell you this. I am super proud grandfather. Like, I'm obnoxiously proud. I'll show you pictures of 5 amazing grandkids. And that would be bad enough, but I have 4 incredibly amazing adult kids. Actually, as of this year, they're not all in their 30s anymore. One just turned 40. And of my 4 kids, 2 are straight with children, and 2 are gay. 1 married, 1 single. And when my first son, one of my sons who is gay, first came out, I got a call, and well, it wasn't when he first came out, it was a while after that, and I was honored to perform his wedding ceremony, which somehow got into the New York Times. And so it got a lot of attention, positive and negative. I got a phone call from someone who I had known since I was a teenager. In fact, he and his now wife and my wife and my now wife and he, when we were teenagers, we used to hang out together. And then we lost touch. We lived in different states. But when he heard that I had an out gay son, he called me and said, could I come see you? He drove 5.5 hours to visit me. Sat in my living room, guy my age, professional, sobbed on my couch because his son had just come out. And I'll never forget. Through his tears, he said to me, here's my problem. If I accept my son, I will reject my father, because my father will never accept my son. If I accept my son, my father, I must reject my son. And we had a very tender talk, but I said, it almost feels like you're having the choice to grow up and understand that you've been your son's father, for 24, 25 years now, and you have to decide how much being his father means to you. And in that moment, I felt not only his pain, I felt pain for all of us in 100 different ways, where previous generations put claims on us. You can't change. You've got to think like I think. Good parents, I don't think, do this. But the best parents don't do this, but probably all of us do it to some degree. But where you've been given conditional love, you're only really loved if you agree with dad or mom or whoever. And this choice of whether you're more loyal to previous generations or you're more loyal to the coming generations who you're preparing the way for. When that friend, and we've obviously been closer since that afternoon when he sat on my couch, as he described his desperate pain, I just felt like he was helping me see something that's true of the human condition. We all reach a point where we make a decision. Are we more loyal to the past or to the future? I'll tell you what happened. This young man who, I left out one detail, he attended my church. This old friend's son attended my church. And when he got engaged, he went to his grandfather and said, I know you don't approve, but I hope you'll come to my wedding. And the grandfather came to the wedding. And the family experienced a deep, deep healing. And things turned out better than anybody expected. But this is the moment that we all face. Are we going to grow up and be adults and make a decision that future generations we have an obligation to? It's the same decision they're making in Glasgow this week. The rights of the dead versus the rights of the living versus the rights of the not yet living. And we who are living have to make some of those important choices. Well, this is especially interesting for Anglicans because the Anglican Via Media, if you're new to Anglicanism or being Episcopal in the Anglican tradition, Church of England history, you maybe haven't heard this term. But the term Via Media is a complex term with a lot of nuance. But one simple understanding of it is that when the Protestant Reformation happened in the early 1500s, when the Germans and others broke off from the Roman Catholic Church to say we can still be Christians and not be Roman Catholic Christians. When they broke off, the Anglican Church took a middle road. They didn't go as far as a lot of the other Protestants. They said, we're taking a middle road. And that became known as the Via Media. And what that's meant for a lot of people is that the Anglican Via Media is sort of a mushy middle, play it safe. We don't want to make the Protestants mad, and we don't want to make the Catholics mad. So we'll find a way to stay out of trouble with everybody. We'll be sort of like, the bridge people. And listen, there's some value to that. I've been in the position of being a bridge person very often. Somebody said, the problem with being a bridge is you get walked on from both sides. And there's some truth to that. And I don't even want to argue if that's what the Anglican Church was. I mean, we could have all kinds of conversations about Henry VIII and all that stuff. I don't care about all that. But I'd like to propose a different way of thinking about it. This isn't the only way, but it's a way of thinking. That you could say that in the early 1500s, change was in the air. The feudal economy that had ruled the world for a very, very long time was being challenged by this new economic system that we now know as capitalism, market economies. The ideas of social class, that you're born into nobility or you're born into, serfdom, this idea of very firmly graded social classes, that was, in fact, Christians believed that God had you born into a class, and that's where God ordained you to be, and that's where you should be all of your life. We've forgotten how deeply ingrained that is. In fact, I'll tell you, we talked about racism a lot this morning. I have a feeling that part of the animus with the U.S., meaning sort of the negative energy of racism in the United States came from people who had been in Europe, part of very class-graded structures. And when they came to America, people from the lower class got a chance to be above somebody else. So the Scots, like many of my ancestors, the Scots who had been in Scotland and later Northern Ireland, and who had been seen as dirt by the English, as uncivilized by the English. By the way, the Irish were in the same situation. They came and they perpetuated their abuse on others because now they could take the dominant role and superior role over someone else. But all that's to say, however we want to describe it, I think what I'm about to share with you is one dimension of it that could be valid that I'd like to encourage you to consider as an option for yourselves. That we had change in the air, and the Catholic Church said, no way, we are too invested in the way things are. This guy, Galileo, who's telling us that our model of the universe is wrong, we'll silence him. And these upstarts who are saying that they can translate the Bible into their own vernacular languages so that they can talk about it themselves, we do the interpreting of the Bible, thank you very much, nothing doing. And so there was a resistance to change and a reassertion of domination over people to say, we're in charge, we make the rules, and that's not going to change. That's the resistance. Do you understand? By resisting change, you change. You become more resistant. And did you know that Catholicism, as people who've grown up with it in our lifetimes, and I would guess that many people here grew up in the Catholic Church. Maybe some of us are still Catholic. I told you my wife said that, my mother-in-law said, if I wasn't smart enough to marry an Italian, at least, if I wasn't smart enough to be an Italian, at least I was smart enough to marry an Italian. She felt the same about me not being Catholic, right? But the Catholicism of people today was not the Catholicism before the Reformation. It was a form of Catholicism that was defined by the Council of Trent, when the Catholic Church had to button things down even more to resist these upstart Protestants. So when you resist change, you become different. Now look, for all of you Episcopalians, you can look with great empathy on what's going to happen in the Methodist Church in the coming months. What's already happening and will continue to happen, because you went through this before. And you know that the people who left to resist change, you understand, they changed. Resisting change changes you. And so that's one option. Change comes and you resist it. If you think that you can keep things going just as they are while you resist change, you will change the thing that you're trying not to change by being more resistant. And then other people react. So you have Catholics killing Protestants, Protestants return the favor. And they start killing Catholics and killing their fellow Protestants. Martin Luther, he's all about, freedom of the Christian man to think differently. But one of his most famous documents, Freedom of the Christian, sometimes translated Freedom of the Christian Man. Women weren't very high up in Protestant thinking at this point either. But interesting, he was all for his freedom to defy the Pope. He was not much for the freedom of others, the Mennonites and the Amish and the others, to defy his thinking. Right? Interesting, you have resistance and you have reaction. Two spirits, the spirit of resistance, the spirit of reactionary, even a certain revenge will show you. I'd like to propose that a better way of understanding a via media is as a third alternative to either resistance or reactivity. Sam Shoemaker was just mentioned, and any of you who've been part of the recovery movement, you've probably heard a little proverb in the recovery movement. You're only as sick as your reactivity. And our reactivity creates sickness. And for a group of people to say, we see those folks there being resistant to change, and reasserting their dominance. We see those folks over there being reactive and angry, and in some ways falling into the trap that Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher, said, beware when fighting the monster, lest you become the monster. And there's a kind of mirroring that happens when this group of people become angry resistors, and these kind of people become angry reactionaries. These people become hateful resistors, and these people become hateful reactionaries, and now their anger and hate makes them look more and more alike. Have you ever seen that? Yeah, you turned on cable news this morning. So there could be, instead of another word for via media is a third way, a tertio modo, to say it's not that we're in the mushy middle, it's we're seeing two forces react, and we don't feel either of them can lead us forward. We don't hate them, we don't react against them, but as we observe what's happening, it makes us say we have to chart a different course into the frontier, a creative alternative. And to do that is not less radical, but more. Because very often you'll receive some criticism from both sides. They won't understand you. In fact, here's when they really won't understand you. When you're willing to talk to the other side. When you're willing to speak lovingly and respectfully and build relationships with two groups of people who hate each other. And you do this with full knowledge. You say, look, I need you to know, folks on the other side, I love them. They're friends of mine. And I speak to them with the same respect I'm speaking to you. It's a different way of positioning yourself in a highly polarized world. And remember, we really are polarized now. We're not just making this up. This polarization is real. January 6th may not have been the last gasp of an attempt at overthrowing the government. It may have just been one of the first of many that we're going to see, and they may succeed. Anything could happen. But remember, in the Reformation, people were killing each other. There was something called the 30 Years' War, where like half of the population in parts of southern Germany were killed because Catholics were killing Protestants and Protestants were killing Catholics. And not all of it was just because of swords and other kinds of weapons. It was because the men all went off to fight the wars across Europe, and nobody was home to plant the crops, and so the next winter a lot of people starved to death. The social and economic unrest that was caused by the polarization. And can you understand, if you all took it as your job not to play the mushy middle, but to take the tertio modo, the third way, to have a creative alternative, can you see why that could be a rather significant role to take? Now, I need to say that, in fact, just about 2 weeks ago, an Episcopal priest in Florida said these words to me: Jesus is everywhere except in the middle of the road. And she was echoing Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who said, if you are neutral, or we could say moderate, in the face of injustice, you are supporting the oppressor. So we're not talking about playing it safe, being in the mushy middle, walking in the middle of the road. We're talking about a third way that is not moderate, it's constructive. It's not cautious, it's creative. It's saying, we got to figure out how to get ahead here. We've got to figure out how to love all our neighbors, the Fox News neighbors and the MSNBC neighbors, who I'm not saying are equivalent. Those are not two equivalent news channels. make no mistake. We have we don't just have differences of opinion on facts. We have different facts floating around out there now. And so I'm not one for both sidesism. I think you can't make equivalencies when some people are dealing with truth and other people are literally believing that aliens are influencing Hillary Clinton to eat babies and stuff. I mean, And so what I think we have to say is we should have reverence for the dead. We should have reverence for the great saints of our past. But here's my question. Do you honor Thomas Cranmer more? Listen to me here. I really want you to think about this. Do you honor Thomas Cranmer more by feeling that for the rest of time you have to say what Thomas Cranmer said, or by following Thomas Cranmer's creative, brilliant, revolutionary example in doing in our time what he did in his time? Do you feel that? I told you I'm a nerd, and I got picked up by somebody at an airport to be taken to a speaking engagement. And he was a professor at the university, at the seminary where I was teaching, and he had just gotten his PhD. And can any of you who've gotten PhDs, you are going to understand what I say. If someone shows you the slightest curiosity about your PhD, you feel you've made a new friend for life. And especially if it feels sincere. And so I asked this fellow, what was your PhD on? And when he told me, I was so sincerely interested that I said, when I get driven back to the airport tomorrow, could you drive me? I want to hear the rest of this story. So I'm going to tell you this story because it's an example of this creative third way. So Queen Elizabeth, not the current one, but the Elizabethan England, Queen Elizabeth of the Shakespeare era. She's living at a time when Catholics and Protestants want to kill each other. And she's got a bunch of them in the Church of England. And as the Queen, she's got responsibility for everybody. And what she knows is there are these hot-headed reactionary Puritans who are preaching sermons against the papists every Sunday and, calling hellfire and brimstone down on them and calling for civil war. Not unlike preachers we have in the United States today, by the way. She also knows she's got preachers of Catholic sympathies within her church, priests of Catholic sympathies, who are, in their own way, sowing the seeds of discord. And she's the Queen. She's got to get these people to get along. So what this fellow, I never knew this. Did you all know this? She ordered that a group of people write the sermons that priests would read for a period of years because she couldn't afford to have them preaching their own sermons because she was afraid they were going to work for civil war. So she got a group of priests together and said, I need you to write these sermons so that you can write sermons that will draw the reactionaries and the resistant into some kind of common ground. I'd never even heard about this. So this is what he did his PhD on. But here's where it gets interesting. When he was in England, in some of those libraries, in some corner where nobody ever reads, he tried to find the first editions of those sermons, because they came out in several editions. He found a first edition with the Queen's handwriting in the margins. And he read the corrections she made to the first edition. And then he went and found the second edition, and all of those corrections were made. He found the Queen's edits on the sermons. And in his dissertation, he analyzed her theological and political acumen in saying, the next edition, we better change that sentence. And he was able to then reflect on this. So you understand, what she was doing was not being a resistor, and she was not being a reactionary, and she was not being the mushy middle. She was trying to chart a course ahead that could bring these people who want to kill each other to living together in some degree of harmony in the church. I mean, you might not have to be a nerd to find that really interesting. She was basically saying, as a nation, we have to have a common vision, and we have to think about a way of life that our grandchildren can live in without hating each other the way people hate each other now. And so I'd like to think about your heritage in the Church of England, because it is a curse and it is a blessing. Let me explain what I mean. The fact that the Church of England was a national church meant that it had privileges with the government, so that the Church of England did persecute some of those Puritans. And in fact, part of American history is that some of those Puritans felt so persecuted by the Church of England that they wanted to come as pilgrims to the United States. That's part of our history. And there was some ugly things done by church leaders, some violent things done by church leaders, not only at that time, but during the whole era of English colonization. That map that Melinda showed of the British Empire, you understand, there was an awful lot of priests who were, in a sense, giving moral legitimacy to an awful lot of immoral things that were happening. So there's problems, there's embarrassments of having a national church. But I'll tell you something that's pretty darn impressive. You see, the Baptists and the Presbyterians and people who, from my background, the Plymouth Brethren, who just thought they were the only people who had it right. These different sects that broke off from the Church of England, they could say, to hell with everybody else, we're just going to take care of our little group. And I mean that literally, not as a profanity, right? We're just going to worry about ourselves. The Church of England had to worry about everybody. Everybody is part of our parish. That could be one of your blessings going forward. Many of you would know the name Rob Bell. When Rob was still pastor in Michigan, we've been friends for years. He hired a friend of mine to be one of his associate pastors. And I was up there speaking, and the associate pastor told me what had happened the week before. They've been going through some deep theological rethinking. In fact, exactly the shift that we talked about this morning, seeing Exodus as the primary biblical narrative, understanding salvation as liberation, and in understanding that our job is to participate with God at the frontier of change for the better in our world. And so a group of leaders from the church made an appointment with the mayor of Grand Rapids. And they went into the mayor's office, and I hope I'm not violating a confidence by saying this, but they went into the mayor's office, and my friend who was leading the little group said, "Mr. Mayor, the reason we're here is because our church has gone through a big change lately, and we have a new mission statement as a church." And their mission statement, I don't know if it's changed since then because Rob has left and a lot of changes have happened there, but the mission statement back then was to join the God of the oppressed. That was their whole mission statement. To join the God of the oppressed. So they said, we just changed the mission statement of our church. Our mission is to join the God of the oppressed. And you're the mayor, and you're the mayor of everybody in this town. And we're here to find out how we can help the people in this town who are the most oppressed. So we'd like to form a new relationship with you. We've never been here to see you before, but we're here to help. How can we help join you in serving the oppressed people of the city? My friend told me the mayor started to cry. He said, when I saw your name on my schedule for today, you're the biggest church in my city. And I thought, I have pastors and priests coming to me all the time to complain about this and to complain about that and to complain about that. And he thought, today on my schedule, I have the biggest church in my city coming to complain about something. I've got a big headache today. He said, I've never had a pastor come and say, how could we help for the good of the city? And you're in a position where you could have a message to this state. We're here for everybody. Another Anglican story. I was at a big event in Greenbelt, 1999. Boy, that seems like a long time ago now. And there was this big outdoor festival called Greenbelt. And back then, 20,000 people would come to Greenbelt for a week in the late summer. And one of the bishops there was involved in this project. They'd put out a document called The Mission-Shaped Church. Some of you may have seen it. It's probably still online. Very powerful document. They basically had their accountants do a spreadsheet of when they go out of business. Because imagine when you have all these church buildings from the 14th and 16th and even earlier centuries that need huge amounts of upkeep that must be maintained because they're historic buildings, but the number of people attending those buildings is going down. So your real estate carrying costs skyrocket as your income goes down. So they face it, and they said the future is going to be different from the past. And as we're walking along, this bishop said to me, we have redefined our mission. He said our mission is to see where Jesus Christ is at work in the world and to join him there. And I said, Bishop, that means that if the Pentecostals are there where the Spirit of Jesus is at work in the world, you want to join the Pentecostals there. And if the Methodists, you want to join the Methodists there. And if there are Muslims working for the good of the community, and he just smiled and he said, it means what it says. But that's a vision. It's a different kind of vision that is in your heritage as Anglicans, from having a Church of England that was a national church and was also a colonial and imperial church. Here's the irony. Because England ran an empire, they ended up with immigrants from all over their empire. So now if you go to England, you know the national dish is curry. And what that's meant is they've had to wake up to the reality that a national and ethnic church is now an international and multicultural church. Sound familiar? An Episcopal Church. The fact that the Episcopal Church is run by bishops, is led by bishops. You understand, other Protestants said, Catholics have bishops. We are so done with bishops. We're going to do things democratically. Can I tell you something? When your voters will vote for what's harmful, if you can have bishops who can, in a sense, challenge you to go beyond what the people are ready for, to nudge them forward, an episcopacy can be a pretty darn helpful thing in times of change. If I can say it this way, if teachers want to really do what's needed for the students, and they know the principal will back them up, even if the parents complain, that can be a helpful thing. It's not easy, but it really can be helpful. A liturgical church, as Meg, wasn't that a brilliant message yesterday? Oh my goodness. That was just poetry, I thought. But the power of liturgy. See, I want to tell you something. I came, as I told you, from a really somewhat extreme evangelical sect, and we prided ourselves in not having liturgy. We were led by the Spirit. Here's what I found out. The difference between having a liturgy and not having a liturgy is not really that. It's the difference between having a written liturgy and an unwritten liturgy. And at least when you have a written one, you can talk about it and maybe change it. And so much we could say about liturgy. But that's what you already have people who are thinking about. And the power of liturgy to bring people into common prayer so that we're learning to pray and think of God and think of our mission and think of our place in the world together. Incredible benefit of having a liturgical church when you have people who are thinking the way that was demonstrated in that brilliant message yesterday that to me was just breathtaking. And then a historic church. Now listen, there's a kind of historic church that says we've been around for a long time, so we have it all figured out. And you all understand what's happening now in Catholicism is a cautionary tale to everybody. Can you imagine if any other organization had the pedophilia scandals that have happened in the Catholic Church? Imagine if a Muslim group had that kind of pedophilia scandal. And can you imagine that so many of the American Catholic bishops are acting as if they still have all the moral authority in the world to go against Pope Francis, who's telling them to hear the cries of the earth and the cries of the poor, and yet they act as if they're above it all. I mean, it's staggering, the blindness. That's history-induced blindness. We've been in charge for a long time. That must clearly mean we're right. But there's another side of being a historical church, where you have enough history that you look back and you say, we got it wrong there. And we repent. And we vow to never make that mistake again. And we'll own this, and we'll tell the story, and we won't cover it up. We got it wrong. And here's what we've learned. And we're going to take that wisdom forward. It's only one of three options. Your other option, we've never made any mistakes. That's just our enemies spreading false messages about us. Or, our group made bad mistakes. We're going to leave them and form a pure group that doesn't have that in our history. And you understand, when a group of people say, we are now the pure ones, that is a group I do not want to join. Because that kind of pride goes before a great fall. You know, one way to describe the Catholic part of Anglicanism is to say that when you have all these sectarian groups who leave because they're better than you, you're saying, well, we're the church for all the leftovers after all the elite people leave. And that is part of having a historic church that can say, of course we have mistakes. And we are dedicated to facing them and naming them and learning from them and not covering them up and making them part of our history as we move forward. I'll just tell you a quick story about a hymn before we conclude. I bet a lot of you have this hymn, and I bet a lot of you love it. I love this hymn because I'm a nature guy, and I just think we need all the more nature-oriented hymns that we can possibly find. But you know them, I bet you could sing it with me. All things bright and beautiful, all creatures great and small. Oh, you're so good. All things wise and wonderful, the Lord God made. Okay, so far so good. And then we get the purple mountain and the beautiful flower and the fish, and we sing all these beautiful things. But there's a verse of that hymn from the original that I don't think you sing. It was in the original from the Victorian period, and here's the verse. I mean, this feels like it comes right out of Charles Dickens. The rich man in his castle, the poor man at his gate, you made them high or lowly and ordered their estate. All things bright. Talk about the power of liturgy. Do you feel that? I mean, it makes me want to wash my mouth out. And so what we did is we dropped that verse from our hymnals. Thank God we don't sing it anymore. But I think we need to keep telling the story of that lost verse to remind ourselves to say, what are we singing today? That our children and grandchildren to the 7th generation will look back on and say, I wish they would have dropped that verse. And what are we not singing today? That 7 generations from now, they would have wished we would have been singing today. Because when you're on the frontier, you're thinking about the future. I know it's hard to believe, but Advent's coming soon. In fact, as soon as Halloween is over, you'll start seeing the Christmas trees in the Walmarts, I think. Oh, yeah? Oh, it's after July 4th now. But you all know that one of our great Christmas hymns that almost everyone knows the first verse of is an example to me. Imagine during the years in this country of slavery and Jim Crow. It wasn't an American who wrote this lyric. It was a Frenchman. And he wrote, "O holy night, the stars are brightly shining." And we could sing that one too. The night of the dear Savior's birth. And there was a second verse. And there was a third verse. And in the United States, they didn't sing that third verse for a long time. I bet many of you sing it now. Truly, he taught us to love one another. His law is love, and his gospel is peace. Chains shall he break, for the slave is our brother, and in his name all oppression shall cease. The power of liturgy and song to bring people together and give them a vision of a better future. There's so many things. Listen, with COVID and with all that's going on and all the political craziness that's going on in our world right now and all of the Facebook-induced insanity and all of the, all the stuff that's going on. This is not an easy time to be a church. It's not an easy time to try to do this kind of work. But when you listen to the calls of your children and grandchildren 7 generations ahead and say, what would they be begging us to sing and preach and say and pray? If you hear those voices, you'll join Jesus on the new frontier. Amen? Amen. Thanks.